One of the things that I found particularly interesting is a gentleman by the name of Dan Friedberg. So to everyone listening right now, there's a good chance they maybe heard this name and forget how he's connected. But the more I was looking into it, and also based on some of the information that's been fed my way, he seems to be a very pivotal player. So could you, I guess, do the listeners a favor and explain your understanding of how he fits into this and maybe some conjecture of how the storyline for him might play out?
Yeah. I've definitely got thoughts on both those things. Dan Friedberg is, I say Friedberg. Some people pronounce it Freiberg. I'm not sure exactly what the pronunciation is. They did not provide me with a pronunciation key. But Dan Friedberg, to me, is the key to this entire thing. I would certainly say there's an angle here for us to talk about SBF's parents possibly being the masterminds behind all this. Okay. But Dan Friedberg is the architect for sure. So who Dan Friedberg is, he was a lawyer for Phil Hellmuth. A lot of people know I'm a big poker player. I make 135th in the main event. Last year was a highlight of my life.
Congrats.
So, well, thank you, man. It was really unbelievable. It was awesome. It was in November last year. And, I always wanted to play in the main event. And then I was the chip leader on day 5 and I got on the TV and then I lost some pocket aces and it's whatever. So, but it was really cool. It was really fun. So I love poker. I love Phil Hellmuth. He's one of my favorites. I know a lot of people don't like, they call him the Brad or whatever. Mike Mattisau, the mouth, he never met me, I guess. They think he's the mouth. And, they were both involved with something called Ultimate Bets. They were promoters. Well, Dan Friedberg was actually Phil Hellmuth's personal lawyer. And Phil Hellmuth got approached by Ultimate Bet. There's 2 names, something poker, Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet, I think is the other one. Okay. But it was basically one network. And he got introduced through Phil Hellmuth to this network. Well, what happens is he comes into the inside of it. I'm not sure if he completely left Phil Hellmuth. He screwed Phil Hellmuth for sure. But what happens is he starts showing them how to build an architecture for a shell company game to be able to protect themselves because they were about to run the biggest scam in poker history. They created something called God mode. And what's so fascinating is when you break all this down, it is FTX. It's the same exact model. So they created something called God mode to where players who had God mode, which were people that worked there, they could see the other people's cards. So Mike Mattisau would be like, it's weird. Like they would just call me in the afternoon and be like, hey, Mike, you want to come play heads up? Like, yeah, sure. We'll go play heads up. And then they'll steal $1 million from him. Now, supposedly they stole $1 million from Mike Mattisau during this God mode thing. Obviously it wouldn't have been in one session or he wouldn't have came back, but they would lose sometimes on purpose. I mean, if you're cheating in poker, I mean, people can assume the way that works, like you can't give all your cards away the first time, They might even let him win a few sessions, but ultimately they took $1 million from Mike Mattisau using this where they could see his cards. And so they used this against a lot of big name players that were coming in who had why? Because the big players are the ones that have the 7 figures. And so at some point people start getting suspicious. And so they have an internal fail-safe that deletes a ton of the data. So they deleted the website. They deleted so much stuff, the servers, they cleaned them, but it was a mechanism that did it, that deleted a lot of the data points. And then, of course, one guy, it was not Dan Friedberg, I can't remember the guy's name, they basically set him up as the scapegoat for the entire thing, and he's the only one, I believe, that got in trouble. Now, let's compare this to FTX. Shell company architecture, you can't even figure out where all the money is with them. SBF has his own companies that he has a ton of Robinhood stocks in, ton of other shares. We don't even know where all that stuff is or what it is. Number 2, the God mode. God mode, same thing for FTX. Alameda could see all the trades on FTX. Alameda could see your stop loss. They could see your liquidation point. In your account, they could see everything. It's the same thing in poker. If you see the other person's cards, you win. Well, if you see liquidation points for big traders that have big liquidations, you can win too because you can force the price right down there and pop it back up because, there's a lot of money on the line here. Third of all, the fail safe. The hack that occurred a couple weeks ago, it was not about where the money went. And that's the misdirection. Some of the money went to CZ. Some of it went to Vitalik. Some of it went to Kraken. That was to confuse people. It was not about... And look, I'm not a developer. I'm not a coder. I can tell you exactly how it works. I'm not a tech guy. Okay. But it was all about destroying data points that got left behind on FTX. That's what they were doing. they were sending the money out to addresses and cleaning what was going on inside of the FTX website with the servers. There's data points that have been destroyed there. Number 4, fall guy. Well, SBF is the fall guy. SBF is going to end up taking the fall for this entire thing. He's certainly part of it. His parents are going to sell him up the river, I believe. But whatever the point is there, what's going to happen with Dan Friedberg next? So it's the same scam, perpetuated, very clearly same scam. Now you say, what's going to happen to Dan? Well, Dan's cockroach. Okay. He survived the ultimate bet scandal. And by the way, they had Dan on video admitting a lot of the stuff with ultimate bets. That's why we know none of this is conjecture. Okay. He literally on video said that, he's like, maybe we can just pay out the customers $5 million and, that'll be good enough. He was talking about settling it with the players because they knew it was a scam. So he's not innocent, but he's good at staying out of jail. He didn't even lose his lawyer license in the state of New York when the ultimate bet scandal, the largest scandal in poker history, when it happened. And so what my feeling is Dan is going to flip, get immunity and tell the tale on Sam and make it seem like Sam was the only person who was involved in it.
So just to tie this all together for everyone listening, Dan was the lawyer for Ultimate Bets. This happened all in, I believe,
he's also the general counsel for FTX. I didn't actually say that.
So
he's
was
the general counsel of FTX now.
Early 2000s, he was involved in this massive scam. I believe $40 million with Ultimate Bet. And now he was the chief regulatory officer for FTX and then the legal counselor for Alameda. And it seems like there's a lot of similarities in the story. The only difference is instead of 40 million, he did it at the scale of 40 billion. Like he just added 3 more zeros onto it.
It was a test run. The first one was a test run.
That's ridiculous. So a couple people you brought up here that I want to get a little bit more into is Sam Bankman-Fried's parents. So they were law professors at Stanford. Apparently, they now have millions in assets of real estate in the Bahamas. What's your take on that whole craziness?
Well, they're securities lawyers, and they're also are professors at Stanford. And like they just had like $121 million worth of real estate that they own in the Bahamas.
I guess being a professor pays well.
Exactly. I guess, they used to say like, if you can't learn, then teach or something like that. Well, I guess if you can't get, if you're poor, just teach. And apparently you'll get all the money. So it's very sketchy what's going on there. But it's not just that. It's not just their ties with money. You start looking at what they do. Okay, Sam Bankman-Fried's dad, not only does he did work for them in the regulatory area for FTX and Alameda, but when it comes to the mom has her own political action committee, her own PAC, raising political donations. The dad also literally did legislation, like helped Elizabeth Warren with tax legislation. They've got all these tax shelters, all these homes, and all these offshore places. I wonder what he was doing that for. And the argument can be made. And I don't want to take, this is not about taking Sam off the hook. And this is not about like punishing Sam. We want Sam to be punished for sure. But we also want the problem fixed, which we can get into in a second. But the whole issue here is it's starting to look like maybe his parents have had him doped up on Adderall his entire life and have just been pushing him around and telling him what to do. The aunt, SBF's brother, same thing. They also have their own, political endeavors and their own companies to where they're sending money and donations to the Democratic Party. And as you start to see that this is a poisoned family tree, if you will.